Why should I pretend to have a father when he's never wanted to have me for a son?
My sister Megan ruined everything for me, even my wedding, and I'll never forgive her.
When I drink, nothing can hurt me. I can loosen up and people almost like me. At least drinking's one thing I'm good at.
My sister and I will never forget what our father did to us. No little kid should be subjected to that. But we stopped using it as an excuse for everything that was wrong in our lives. We let go. We healed. We forgave.
These are some of the voices you'll hear in the next 60 minutes. Voices from the case files of Sidney and Suzanne Simon. For more than 21 years, the Simons have done pioneering work in the areas of personal growth, values clarification, and self-esteem. The courses Dr. Simon teaches at the University of Massachusetts and the seminars he and his wife have conducted throughout the United States, Europe, and Canada have helped countless men and women improve their sense of self-worth and make positive changes in their lives. Every one of us has been hurt, either by parents who expected too much or too little, who were overbearing or distant, who were absent or abusive. Some of us were hurt by teachers who belittled and berated, labeling us as slow learners or having behavioral problems. Others have encountered prejudice or discrimination or insensitivity because of their race, religion, or disability. Forgiveness is a practical program which you can use right now to release you from the pain of past hurts. Dr. Simon and his wife, Suzanne, hold open the door to a way of life in which you are relieved of the unhealed wounds. Full of practical ideas and real-life examples, including the very personal story of healing told by Suzanne Simon, this Nightingale Conant audio program will give you an invaluable resource you'll want to listen to again and again, and put into practice right now.
Two Buddhist monks on their way to the monastery found an exceedingly beautiful woman at the riverbank. Like them, she wanted to cross the river, but the water was too high. So one of the monks lifted her onto his back and carried her across. His fellow monk was thoroughly scandalized. For 2 hours he berated his friend on his negligence in keeping the rule. Had he forgotten he was a monk? How dare he touch a woman? And worse, carry her across the river? And what would people say? Had he brought their holy religion into disrepute? The offending monk listened patiently to the never-ending sermon. Finally, he broke in and said, "Brother, I dropped that woman at the river. Are you still carrying her?" Like that monk, most of us are still carrying a burden we could have dropped at the river long ago. Experiences in our own lives and those of thousands of others we've counseled have convinced us that most people haven't yet healed their old wounds nor made peace with their pasts. When we don't let go of the pain does not let go of us. Like a tired, irritable, downtrodden traveler, our excess baggage weighs us down, saps our energy, and slows our progress. Sometimes it even convinces us to cancel the trip, which means either giving up completely on our goals and aspirations, or settling for far less than we planned originally. Up until now, many of us didn't know there was any other way to travel. What we will do in this program is open up some of your extra baggage and show you how to discard the needless weights you've carried for so long. Soon, you too will be able to face your life, standing tall, and ready to take up your journey with enthusiasm in your step and joy in your heart.
Of course, you may think that you've already recovered from most of those old injuries and injustices from years ago. You don't think that your painful or disappointing past experiences can affect you. And maybe that's true. But take a moment and answer these questions truthfully. Do you hold grudges against your parents or siblings? Are your family relationships strained at best? Did you swear that you'd never treat your children the way you were treated, but now find yourself doing and saying the same old things that you grew up resenting? Do you sometimes feel as if you're reenacting your past, playing and replaying the same tired scenes with new actors standing in for the people who hurt you? Have you put up walls to prevent people from hurting you, only to find you are the one trapped behind those walls, feeling lonely and isolated? Are you always on guard, ready to do unto others before they can do unto you?
If you answered yes to any of those questions, chances are you're still hanging on to something that hurt you. You can learn to put it behind you once and for all, but first you must learn to recognize the connection between your past and your present. Suzanne and I aren't saints, and we're not superhuman. We simply got tired of living in pain from the past and became willing to try something new. Because we did it, we know you can do it too. It doesn't matter what hurt you or how you've reacted to that hurt. You have the wisdom and inner resources to heal your wounds and create a better life for yourself and those around you. You can find inner peace if you are willing to work your way through this healing process. The steps you must take are deceivingly simple. First, you acknowledge that you were hurt, and you acknowledge what you've done because you were hurt. Then you get rid of the guilt and shame the hurt has caused you. You also stop blaming yourself for everything that happened. Next, you stop playing the victim, no longer allowing yourself to wallow in self-pity and lash out at others as you consistently repeat the past. As you unload your anger, you'll realize that you're a survivor who can finally put the past in its proper perspective. You don't forget what happened, but you accept it as only one small part of the special person who is you.
You'll find, as we did, that the healing process can bring you joy and hope and a future filled with whatever you want it to be. But I want to warn you, this is not a miracle cure. The healing path is long and difficult, and at times even painful. Completing unfinished business takes time and lots of work, but you'll find it's the most rewarding journey you've ever taken.
My sister Megan has been a thorn in my side ever since the day she was born. She was one of those pretty babies everyone oohed and ahed over. Mother decided we should go everywhere together, and I never could get rid of her. If my friends and I didn't do what Megan wanted, she nagged and whined or threw a tantrum. And it didn't get any better when we got older. No matter what I did, she stole the show. She even stole my boyfriend, and then bragged to me about how romantic he was with her, even when she knew he'd never touched me. Megan took every potentially happy moment away from me. She even showed up on the night before my wedding to announce that her latest boyfriend had gotten her pregnant. The family was so upset, they forgot all about the fact I was getting married. So why should I be the one to give up what little's left of my pride and dignity to forgive her?
When she told us this story, Elise was a 33-year-old high school English teacher and the happily married mother of 2 children. Her feud with her sister Megan had been going on literally for decades. Elise equated forgiveness with giving up and giving in. Like most of us, she believed that people who hurt us should pay for the pain they caused, that they should be punished, not forgiven. And as we view it, that punishment is our lack of forgiveness, our active resentment of them and our refusal to readmit them to the human race. The irony is that in many cases they aren't even aware of our misery. While we are turning ourselves inside out, they don't feel a thing. Like Elise, Warren had not found a convincing reason to forgive his father for treating him like the invisible kid throughout his childhood. When we met him, Warren was a 35-year-old building contractor with a wife and children.
My father made it very obvious from day one that he'd wished I'd never been born. He was just starting medical school when Mom got pregnant, and my father did the honorable thing. He never let her forget how she tricked him into marriage. I still remember those fights. But I figured that if I tried hard enough, I'd earn his love. I got good grades, and he didn't care. I went out for sports, and he never came to the games I was in. The worst part was after my parents were divorced. I was 15. My father remarried right away and had 3 children, and he was to them the father I'd always wanted him to be for me. By the time I turned 21, I gave up trying to win his love and got on with my life. As my family grew, I made sure I had no contact with my father. Then, 2 years ago, he had a heart attack. That was supposed to change everything. I found out my wife had sent him flowers and a get-well card, and I almost took her head off. Now he calls us and invites us to the house because he says he wants to know his grandchildren. My wife thinks we should patch things up. Patch what up? There's nothing between us, and there never was. If he's getting old and wants to see his grandchildren, that's something he should have thought of years ago. He made his bed, now he can lie in it.
Warren associated forgiveness with forgetting or absolving, letting the bad boys get away with the rotten things they'd done, almost as if you condoned their actions. This is a reaction we hear all the time. Another reaction is the non-reaction. Take Marcy, for instance. She came to one of our forgiveness seminars with her mother, who was a recovering alcoholic. Marcy had chosen not to deal with the hurt at all.
I really don't understand any of this. What's done is done. I can't go back and change the fact that my parents were alcoholics. Look, my dad is dead. My mom doesn't drink anymore, so what's the point of digging up all this old stuff? It's only going to complicate my life and make me remember things I'd rather forget.
Marcy reminded us of a colleague of ours who's quite frank about expressing his views on the teaching of forgiveness. Quote, "I think this is all hogwash. You'll turn everyone into benign, benevolent zombies. They'll all be too blissed out to function in the real world where you need a good, strong suit of armor to make sure you don't get eaten alive." This not at all unique perspective reflects the idea that attempting to forgive the people who hurt you will open up a Pandora's box, the contents of which will send you plunging into an emotional abyss. Not only will you be forced to relive unpleasant experiences and admit how badly you were hurt, you'll also be vulnerable to being hurt again. If that's how you view forgiveness, think about this. You might just be afraid to forgive. Perhaps the anger, bitterness, and resentment you have felt all these years serve as a barrier, protecting you from pain, anxiety, and self-doubt. For perhaps the first time in decades, you'll be forced to seriously consider the magnitude of old injuries and injustices. You may have to give up the attitudes and behaviors that have protected you from being hurt again. From this vantage point, forgiveness can be a frightening concept, and most of us prefer to avoid rather than openly embrace the things we fear.
Even for those of you who picked up this tape feeling ready to forgive, feeling willing and even anxious to get rid of your grudges and heal your old wounds, forgiving isn't easy. If it were, you'd have done it by now without our help. But the fact is, you haven't. And one of the reasons you haven't is that not forgiving has provided you with certain payoffs or illusions. For instance, you've had the illusion that if this hadn't happened, you'd have had a perfect life. Or the illusion that you're good because of what the bad guys had done to you. And then there's the illusion of being powerful, because no one can make you forgive. And finally, the illusion that if you don't forgive, you won't ever be hurt again. But are the benefits of not forgiving worth the price you pay for holding grudges, harboring resentments, and hanging on to pain from the past? We don't think so. The life you have now is nowhere near as full and fulfilling as the life you can create by letting go of the pain and making peace with the past.
Before we go any further, I want to be sure that you're familiar with what we mean by forgiveness. The easiest way to explain it is to tell you what forgiveness isn't and what it is. Both definitions are important if we're going to understand it fully. First, forgiveness is not forgetting, nor should it be. We can learn from the experiences that are etched indelibly on our memories. Second, forgiveness is not condoning. What was done to us was bad and it did hurt. There can be no forgiveness if we minimize or justify the act. Third, forgiveness is not absolution as some religions teach it. We do not absolve others of the responsibility of their actions. We don't let them off the hook. Fourth, forgiveness is not a form of self-sacrifice. It's not gritting our teeth and making nice. And fifth, forgiveness is not a clear-cut, one-time decision. You can't finish this tape and decide to forgive everyone who's ever hurt you and then get on with your life. It doesn't work that way. Forgiveness is what happens naturally as the result of confronting painful past experiences and healing old wounds. It's an ongoing process.
So now that you know what forgiveness isn't, let's talk about what it is. Forgiveness is a byproduct of an ongoing healing process. It's the gift we receive when we no longer expect our tormentors to pay for what they did or to make it up to us in some way. Forgiveness is an internal process, a feeling of wellness and freedom and acceptance. Forgiveness is a sign of positive self-esteem, proof that we're more than the sum total of the negative past experiences. Forgiveness is letting go of the intense emotions attached to incidents in our past. We remember what happened, but we no longer feel intensely angry, frightened, bitter, resentful, or damaged because of it. Forgiveness is recognizing that we no longer need our grudges and resentments, our hatred and self-pity. They're no longer the parameters of our identity. We're more than victims of injury and injustice. Forgiveness is no longer wanting to punish the people who hurt us. We realize we can't even the score, and we find inner peace when we stop trying to. Forgiveness is accepting that everything we do to punish them will hurt us. It's deciding we don't want to hide and hurt and hate anymore. Forgiveness is freeing up and putting to better use the energy once consumed by holding grudges, harboring resentments, and nursing unhealed wounds. It means rediscovering our strengths as we break the cycle of pain and abuse. It means we no longer hurt others as we were hurt. And finally, forgiveness is moving on. It's recognizing that we have better things to do with our lives, and then doing them. However, make no mistake about it, you have to work long and hard at forgiveness. It's only possible if you commit yourself to an ongoing healing process.
I want to say a few things here about the healing process. It's a very personal progression which is influenced by the specific ways you were hurt, how you reacted to the injuries and injustices, what your present circumstances are, and how you visualize your inner peace and perfect life. These are the pieces of your personal jigsaw puzzle. Although many people have accumulated some puzzle pieces that are similar to yours, no one else has all the same pieces you do, and no one is constructing the same picture you are. And since the size and shape of our puzzle pieces change constantly during our lives, just as our goals change, no two people will make the same healing journey. If I had to list the stages of healing, there would be 6. The first is denial, in which we try to play down the impact and importance of past hurts. The second stage is self-blame, in which we try to explain what happened by assuming it was somehow our fault. Then comes the third stage, in which we are the victim, and we allow ourselves to wallow in self-pity and we lash out at everyone around us. The fourth stage of healing is indignation. Now we're angry at the people who hurt us, and while we're at it, at the rest of the world too. The fifth stage is the survivor. Now we can recognize not only our hurt, but our strength. Compassion, humor, and outside interests return. And finally, the sixth stage, integration. At this point, we can acknowledge that the people who hurt us may have been doing the best they could. If we are more than our wounds, maybe they are more than the inflictors of those wounds. We gain perspective without loss of memory. When summarized like this, the 6 stages of the healing process seem clear-cut and almost simplistic, as if you could easily move from one to another in a linear fashion. But that's not how the process really works. Healing happens in fits and starts. You move backwards and forwards among the steps. In fact, the process began when you were first hurt and continues until you are whole again.
My parents were divorced when I was 8. I was an only child, and my father had visitation rights every other Saturday. I was the classic daddy's girl, and I looked forward eagerly to every visit. Only Daddy didn't always show up. The first time he missed was horrible. I'd planned the whole day, and I even made a gift for him in art class. My mother said he'd called to say he couldn't make it, but I told her my daddy wouldn't do that to me. I waited on the front steps for hours. When I finally realized he wasn't coming, I was furious. Not at him, but at Mom. I blamed her because he stayed away. He called and apologized the next day, and everything was fine. Then he missed again, and again. By the time I hit my teens, I hardly saw him at all. I learned early that you can't trust people to do what they promise, because if you did, you were just setting yourself up to be disappointed.
Acknowledging how we've been hurt is an important part of the healing process. Darlene was hurt by the disappointment she felt because her father hadn't lived up to his word. Others have been rejected by a lover, abandoned by a parent, ridiculed by classmates, betrayed by someone they trusted or loved. Perhaps your hurt involved deception, like Betsy's, whose father had one affair after another, even though his family knew about them and were ashamed. Or maybe you were physically or emotionally abused. Whatever the cause of your hurt, whatever the size of your wounds, the fact is you were hurt and you are wounded. The painful and disappointing experience really did happen, and someone is responsible. Whenever we ask our seminar groups to make a list of those who hurt them, parents, spouses, lovers, and children always come out on top. Also on the list, co-workers, friends, employers, teachers, preachers, playmates, ourselves, and even God. But always at the top, parents. And why? We think it's because the wounds they inflicted tend to be the deepest and hardest to heal. Now, most parents, unless they are mentally ill, don't wish us any harm. They're sincerely concerned that we live up to our potential and be the best we can be. They don't get out of bed in the morning planning how to hurt their children. But the fact is, parents can harm us. By attacking us when we're too young to rationalize their behavior, we find our very survival threatened by them. The damage is done when we're learning vital lessons about how to live in the world and relate to other people. Some of us, because of the lessons we were taught in childhood, are left with a cracked or crumbling foundation on which to build our lives. At some level, even when very young, we knew that parents aren't supposed to hurt their children, and when ours hurt us, we recognized instinctively that something was very wrong. We couldn't explain what was happening, and we didn't want to believe it anyway, so we absolved them and blamed ourselves. We denied the painful experience and went to great lengths to assure it didn't happen again. The way we chose to adapt served us at the time and helped us survive. Those same attitudes can be destructive now.
Those of us who haven't learned to forgive, who still walk around nursing old grudges, are like the walking wounded. The news is always full of grudge stories. A bitter child custody battle is waged by former spouses who haven't recovered from the pain of their divorce. A teenage girl who was sexually abused by her father hires a gunman to kill him. A spurned lover's heartbreak turns to hatred and he terrorizes the woman he once adored. Two brothers spend a lifetime competing for their parents' affection. As adults, they're still sworn enemies, and they take their lifelong rivalry to court to contest their parents' will. These are the tragic grudges that make headlines. But let's bring it closer to home. Are you one of the millions of men and women who feel so bitter, angry, or resentful toward your parents, siblings, or children that you refuse to speak to them? Are family gatherings a time of indescribable tension? Do you bombard your mate with a running account of hurts inflicted in the past? Or have you slacked off at work because you didn't get the raise or promotion you deserved? If you have, you know what it is to hold a grudge. But these are obvious examples of what we do because we've been hurt. Unhealed wounds, unforgiven acts, and unfinished business can also get played out in much more subtle and ultimately more devastating ways. Take Bruce, who was a 36-year-old customer service supervisor for a national hotel chain when he attended a 2-day forgiveness seminar we conducted in Phoenix, Arizona.
When I met the Simons, I'd been through a drug and alcohol rehab program, and I'd been clean and sober for a year. Before that, I'd spent 20 years numbing the pain. Now I have to start healing the wounds. My parents were well-educated and achievement-oriented. I was expected to excel in school like my brothers did, but instead I endured 7 years of having teachers call me stupid, lazy, and even hopeless. It turned out I had a severe learning disability, but by the time it was diagnosed, I'd lost countless privileges, everything from watching TV to playing Little League baseball. My parents believed that I was simply refusing to do the schoolwork. By 3rd grade, I stopped trying to learn and devoted myself to avoiding humiliation. I cheated on tests, I paid smarter kids to do my work. My cleverest trick was to act up and get sent to the principal's office every time I was supposed to read aloud. When one teacher finally found me out and taught me how to work around my problem, it was too late. I was sure I was inadequate. I was 14 when I discovered alcohol. When I drank, I felt like nothing could hurt me. I loosened up and people actually seemed to like me. Drinking was something I was really good at. I was a party animal in college, and I added drugs to my list of achievements. Even after I married and had a good job on a middle rung in the corporate ladder, I never felt confident unless I was drunk or high on cocaine. The fact was I was deeply in debt, and my wife was threatening to leave me. Luckily, someone caught me getting high at work, and I was given the choice of going into a rehab program or being fired. I chose rehab, but it was a tougher choice than you think.
As Bruce began to recover from his addictive behavior, he was appalled at how much he'd been willing to risk. No sacrifice had seemed too great if it would help him ward off the pain and fill the empty spaces left by the failures, ridicule, and humiliation he'd felt so long ago. Most of us, both as children and as adults, have longed for some magic potion that would keep us from thinking about the things that bothered us. No matter when or how we were hurt, our first instinctive reaction was to stop the pain. Once we found the way to do that, we tended to continue doing it, using any and every means available to bury and block unpleasant emotions.
Countless men and women bury their pain under mountains of work. We laugh at workaholics, but the term is very appropriate. Work and the attendant exhaustion becomes the numbing drug of choice. Others of us stuff down our fear and loneliness with food. If we feel empty, we fill up with whatever we can find in the refrigerator or liquor cabinet or medicine chest. And when the pain returns, as it always does, we take another dose of our preferred painkiller. Finally, the day comes when we hit bottom. Whatever bottom is for you, you're liable to despise and doubt yourself more than you have ever before. You don't know if you can find the strength to improve your situation, or even if you deserve to be better than you are. Because you were hurt, you probably don't like yourself very much.
Bruce is a good example of that. Because of the criticism, humiliation, and ridicule he endured as a child, he learned to view himself as an incompetent or inadequate person, in short, a failure. Those who suffered abuse may see themselves as damaged goods or different from so-called normal people. Self-esteem that's been damaged by painful past experiences convinces you that you don't deserve more than you have. You must settle for things the way they are. You're incapable of being or doing anything more or better. This perception of yourself, combined with unhealed wounds and unfinished business from your past, steers you down one dead-end street after another. It's the path taken by those of us who are bound and determined never to be hurt again. Remember that suitcase full of hurts we talked about earlier? The one we drag around behind us? Well, it's time to open it up and look inside. Yes, painful memories will emerge, and they'll be difficult to think about. In general, the ones that'll cause the most discomfort and the ones that you most want to push down again as soon as you start thinking about them are the ones that really matter. And these are the ones that you've been denying for a long, long time. So it's time to ask yourself, who has hurt you? When? And most important, who haven't you forgiven?
I can't remember most of it. I do remember that we were working in his dorm room instead of the lounge and that he was paying more attention to me than to his physics assignment. But I told him to cut it out and things seemed to be under control. Then when the tutoring session ended, I got up to leave and he grabbed me and threw me down in the bed. The last thing I remember is thinking this couldn't be happening to me. And then I guess I must have switched off my brain or something because it's just a blank after that. I don't even know how I got back to my dorm. It's been 5 years now, and I still draw a blank. I'll get these flashes once in a while, but I'm not sure if those things really happened or if they're just things I think might have happened. No matter. I don't let them upset me. I just push them out of my mind.
Once you switch it on, denial is exceedingly difficult to switch off. Like a computer that's programmed to perform a certain function when specific information is entered, your subconscious mind reactivates denial whenever you re-experience something similar to the original injury or injustice. Denial becomes as comfortable as an old pair of sneakers, as sticky as flypaper, as automatic as breathing, and habit-forming to boot, which is why we get stuck in denial for a long, long time.
It wasn't that bad. It could have been worse. I got over it years ago. It doesn't bother me anymore. These are the melodies of denial. In each of these, you find a way to put off the pain and avoid the issue. And when rationalizing, minimizing, blocking, and intellectualizing can no longer switch off your brain or stop the onslaught of frightening emotions, you reach for the painkillers and empty fillers we talked about on side 1. These present new problems, which become yet another way of avoiding the big problem. You blame your unhappiness on your weight, your job, your rotten marriage, your financial difficulties, or your addiction. You never look below the surface at the unfinished business that led you down that dead-end street in the first place. What's more, because the problems you do recognize are protecting you from painful past experiences you aren't ready to face, you can never truly solve them. You go on diets, but give up 5 pounds short of your goal. You end one abusive relationship only to find yourself in another. You get sober, but after a few months in recovery, you relapse and go on a binge that makes your old habits look like child's play. When you bought your one-way ticket from pain, you got stuck on the denial merry-go-round.
Now I'd like you to get a pad of paper and a pencil so you can do some exercises. First, make a list of everyone you can think of who's hurt you and describe what they did. It can be a person or institution. Now, copy down these non-denial statements. I was hurt. What happened to me still hurts. That was no way to treat me. It was wrong. I've suffered because of what I went through. I haven't gotten over it yet. It was that bad. Read the description you've written of the person who hurt you and what they did, and then read the non-denial statements. Shout them if you like. Acknowledge that what happened to you was real. And then, I want you to pick one of the people on your list, and as if you were that person, write a letter to yourself, apologizing for what was done. For instance, if your mother hurt you, your letter might read,
Dear Laura, I never knew I was hurting you like I was. I always wanted what was best for you, and I thought that protecting you from life by making you scared of everything and everyone was the way. I also thought telling you everything you did could be better would just get you to reach higher. I guess I wanted everything for you I never had myself. I never meant to talk about you as if you weren't there. I never meant to be so selfish. But it's scary being a parent, and I didn't want to make any mistakes. I guess that's why I could never say I was sorry about anything. Instead, I just got angry at you as if every mistake I made as a parent must have been your fault. I guess I still do that, and that couldn't be very nice for you. I might be too old to change, but I'd really like to try. I love you, Mom.
Writing a letter of apology is a foolproof way to break through the wall of denial you've built around that particular painful past experience. It confirms in writing that you were hurt and that you're aware of the fact. You're not denying it anymore. You're ready now to move on to the next stage in the healing process, but you can expect to return to denial from time to time. If you can't move out of denial, you might ask yourself if you're experiencing other stresses right now, and it's not time to look at and deal with this other big hurt. It's okay to put up your defenses for a little while until your present life straightens out.
When we leave the denial stage, we take a giant leap forward toward healing and forgiveness. At the same time, we come face to face with realities that are not only painful, but incomprehensible as well. We enter the self-blame stage, deciding that bad things happen to us because we did something to make them happen. We weren't good enough in some way. We didn't do what we could have done to prevent them from happening. We set ourselves up to be hurt by expecting too much or ignoring the signs of impending disaster. Take the example of Marcy. By the time she was 10, she'd lived through the Jekyll and Hyde existence that alcoholism brings to a family.
When they were sober, they were the most normal, loving parents in the world. Everything was great. But when they got drunk, they'd laugh hysterically at things that weren't funny, like when dinner was burned to a crisp, or they'd smashed the car or fallen downstairs. Or they'd shout and throw things at each other, or at us. They'd forget to pick us up at school or to buy groceries or even to come home at all. They'd show up drunk at school functions, or they'd pass out in the bathroom, or they'd leave us sitting in the car for hours while they stopped off at a bar for a quick one. It didn't take me long to figure out it was up to me to make sure nothing upset them, and that way we'd have a normal life. When they started drinking, I knew it was because I wasn't more on top of things.
If only is the calling card of the self-blame stage. If only Marcy had stayed on top of things. If only you had said no, kept your mouth shut, trusted your instincts, or been a better son, daughter, spouse, lover, parent, or person. If only you had not expected so much, been so naive or trusting or needy, married so young, or been so fat, thin, poor, dumb, pretty, or sensitive, then bad things wouldn't have happened to you.
You need to think about the bad things that have happened to you, the old wounds you'd like to heal, and the unfinished business you'd like to complete. What do you believe you did to deserve those injuries or injustices? What do you think you could have done to prevent them? What do you believe you should have known at the time you were hurt? Take a few minutes to write a list of statements that you used or still use to blame yourself for what happened to you. These are statements that begin with, if only I had, if only I had not, and I should have. You'll see how these statements may have served you temporarily, but they were never the real reasons for your painful experiences. People who get stuck in self-blame develop tunnel vision. They pursue a single goal, and that's to fix the flaw they believe originally caused their unhappiness. Take Patricia, for instance. She blamed her unhappy childhood on the fact she was overweight. This was certainly a logical conclusion, as she wouldn't have been called Fatty Patty if she'd been thin. However, the obsession with losing weight that began in her teens went beyond wanting to make sure she wasn't ridiculed anymore. Today, she's at least 10 pounds underweight, but she still tells herself that she could meet the right man, be taken more seriously at work, have more energy to get things done, and remedy all the other ills in her life if she could just lose another 5 pounds. Patricia developed bulimia in college, and she still binges and purges. She also exercises compulsively. She's stuck in self-blame. Perfectionism is another hallmark of self-blame. Marcy no longer lives with her parents, but she still believes that if she does everything right, nothing bad will happen to her. She still feels guilty and ashamed and wishes she could lock herself in a dark room and never come out. She is stuck in self-blame.
To move out of self-blame, you must simply stop blaming and punishing yourself for the hurtful things other people do to you. Get out the list of if only and I should have statements that you prepared a few minutes ago. Take an objective look at them. Ask yourself, which of these statements just aren't true? Which reveal that I've assumed responsibility for other people's actions? Which reflect aspects of myself I couldn't possibly change? Cross out any statements that refer to poverty, race, religion, gender, size, and such. These were pre-existing. Any items that remain on your list probably have an element of truth to them. But you've got to sort through them too. Which are distorted? Which are general indictments of yourself? Which are reasonable today? Through this exercise, you can become aware of how self-blame operates in your life today, how old guilt and shame overflow into the present, and what you do or don't do today because of it. You're ready to move on to the next stage of healing. You've made progress because you're no longer blaming yourself for what happened to you, assuming responsibilities for others' actions, berating yourself for what you did wrong or failed to do, or punishing yourself for not being good enough.
The time you spend in the victim stage is likely to be the most painful and self-destructive part of your journey to healing and forgiveness. It's not a pretty sight, and while you're in it, you'll definitely feel stuck, stymied, trapped, and as if nothing about you or your life will ever improve.
Everyone who's been hurt has been victimized, but the real danger lies in victimhood. This is an attitude, a stance, a way of relating to the world, and a reflection of the prevailing feelings we have about ourselves. The victim part of ourselves becomes the largest, most important part of our identity. Victim becomes a label that describes what happened to us and who we think we are. Based on this belief, we write the scenario for the soap opera of our lives, cast ourselves in the victim role, and play our part day in and day out. There are 3 basic victimhood scripts. The wallflower can spend weeks or longer binging not on food but on self-pity. They found a million ways to say, "Oh, poor me," and have taken their pain to the limit. They feel sorry for themselves and loudly proclaim their victimhood by whining, complaining, and rejecting any and all suggestions that might help them feel better. Wallflowers are likely to be depressed, passive or manipulative, capable of Academy Award-winning performances as the long-suffering martyr. They're in a rut, and their low energy, aspirations, and achievement combine with barren human relationships to make sure they don't get out of it. Self-indulgers, on the other hand, use their pain, helplessness, and hopelessness to justify anything they want to do or not do. They can be maddeningly irresponsible, or they can indulge themselves in little ways, like driving the family car and never putting gas in it, or using all the hot water when others are waiting to take showers. Self-indulgers take 20 items to the 10-item express lane and tie up the telephone when you're expecting a call. If anyone comments on their often downright adolescent behavior, they might bristle with indignation and think they don't owe anybody anything. The 3rd category of victimhood is the meaner. They don't look like victims at first glance. They're belligerent and intolerant with very short fuses. They're put-down artists, known for their barbed comments, sarcasm, ridicule, and one-upmanship. They're hypercritical, and nothing is ever good enough for them. Many racists, sexists, homophobics, child abusers, and spouse batterers fall into this category.
As painful, emotionally draining, and physically debilitating as the victim stage can be, you are still healing. In fact, this is the time you are able to meet several important, previously neglected needs. First, you have to blame someone for the bad things that happened to you, as Marcy was able to do.
They were more interested in their booze than in their children. My parents and their drinking destroyed my childhood and messed up my life.
You need to know and say that you were a victim of something.
I used to think I was crazy. The way I overreacted to everything and thought that really devastating things would happen to me if I made a mistake. The way I tried to control things that nobody can really control and could never relax and enjoy myself because I was always watching, trying to anticipate what could go wrong. Now I know that a lot of adult children of alcoholics do those things. I am the way I am because of the way my parents were. And looking at how much I have to do to get my life together makes me very depressed and exhausted. But at least it makes some sense to me now.
You need to grieve for what you lost because you were hurt, just as Marcy realizes she lost her childhood and is learning to mourn it so she can put it in its place and move on. Moving out of the victim stage is a lot like trying to move a huge boulder that has landed in the middle of the road. You can't accomplish it with your bare hands or pushing with all of your might. To move the boulder, you'll need a fulcrum. You slide a board under it and place a smaller rock halfway between you and the boulder. Then you push down on one end of the board to lift up the boulder on the other end. This same principle, which we call the fulcrum theory, applies to moving yourself out of the victim stage. By adopting attitudes and pursuing activities that are incompatible with victimhood, you'll stop seeing yourself as one and you'll stop acting out the same helplessness script. The following visualization is recommended by Philip H. Friedman and is a must for those in the victim stage.
Relax. Shut your eyes and visualize a hot air balloon that's attached not to the customary basket, but to a garbage can. The balloon is tethered to the ground at the moment. Imagine yourself walking over to it, lifting the lid off the garbage can, and dumping all of your emotional garbage into it. Fill the can with your old injuries and injustices, and your resentments and self-deprecating statements, your helpless, hopeless feelings. Tear off your victim label and toss it in. Then replace the lid, untether the balloon, and watch it float away, taking your victim thoughts, feelings, and behaviors with it. Watch until it is no more than a speck in the sky, repeating to yourself, "I release my hurts."
For many of us, the fourth healing stage will be the most difficult of all. It's called the indignation stage, and it forces us to get in touch with the anger that our painful past experiences generated. This is anger that we've worked overtime to keep underground ever since we were hurt. By feeling that anger now, by coming to understand the other, often more threatening emotions hidden behind it, and by finally expressing it in a healthy manner, we clear the way to solving the problems we buried along with it. Megan and Elise are a good example of how this works. Remember, Elise had been burying her outrage and indignation at her sister Megan, but she'd been acting out her resentments in countless ways. When Megan had to tag along with Elise and her friends, Elise didn't stop the taunts and teasing the younger child got. In fact, she subtly encouraged them. As an adult, Elise picked out cheap and useless gifts to give Megan at Christmas time. For her birthday, Elise bought clothes that weren't only ugly, they were several sizes too big, apologizing by remarking that Megan did look as if she'd put on weight. Of course, the person hurt the most by Elise's suppressed anger was Elise herself. If anyone mentioned Megan's name, Elise went into a sulk, wasting whole days of her life by taking Valium, watching soap operas, and taking her anger out on her husband and children.
To get out of this stage, you must let go of the anger you finally acknowledged. In this stage, you go from being angry at the people who hurt you to being angry at the world. You're constantly ready for a fight. You may even look for opportunities to vent your anger, But holding on to your anger makes it impossible to forgive the people who hurt you. Marcy is furious now that her mother is recovering from alcoholism and wants to get back in her daughter's good graces.
Now she wants to be my mother. She offers to babysit so my husband and I can have a night out. She cooks meals and puts them in the freezer so I can microwave them when I get home from work. She clips articles she thinks would interest me. Wants to take me shopping. Oh, you name it. Well, it's too little too late. She can't make up now for what she didn't do then.
The author James Baldwin, in his book Notes of a Native Son, put it this way: I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once that hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with the pain. We wholeheartedly agree. While you're stuck in the indignation stage, you want your hate and your peace of mind, but you can't have both. The first decision you've got to make is not to express your anger and emotions in destructive ways.
The fifth stage in the healing process is the survivor stage. When you reach this stage, you're ready for a bright new life. There aren't any magic words that can bring you to this point more quickly or guarantee you'll never slip back. There's only one way to become a survivor, and that's by surviving. You have the right to declare that you are alive, you're okay, you're back in the driver's seat, and you're better than you've ever been. I'd like to share my story with you now. I've made the perilous and often painful journey through the 6 stages from denial to integration. When my father died, he'd been ill for a very long time. Lying in his casket, he barely resembled the formidable giant who wielded so much power over us when we were children. I don't know what my brother and sister were thinking as they stood beside me in that dimly lit funeral parlor. I, however, was remembering the man who adored my mother, who'd lean over to kiss her outstretched arm while she poured his coffee and played footsie with her under the dinner table. I was thinking about the man who'd been a skilled craftsman, an imaginative storyteller, an avid reader, and an exceptional gardener. I was also remembering the man who'd lash out at us in anger and frustration, who exploded in violent rages, and who came into our bedrooms at night and molested us. It took me 5 years to get from denial to integration. My father never told me not to talk about the incest. He made no overt threats. He did tell me that he could read my mind and knew when I was thinking about it. To be safe from this telepathic invasion of my privacy, I blocked incest from my mind, along with a great many other feelings and thoughts, and most of my childhood. I never denied it happened. I just labeled it as unimportant. It was then filed under too dangerous to dwell on. Just like yours, my healing began the first time I was hurt, and denial was my first medicine. By the time I reached stage 2, self-blame, I believed that if I hadn't been such a pretty little girl, my father wouldn't have molested me. I returned to visit the house I grew up in, and realized that our neighbor would have helped me if I'd confided in her all those decades ago. Again, the fault was mine. By the 3rd stage, I was a victim. Nothing I did made my father molest me. He didn't have to do what he did, but he did do it, and because of it, my life was a mess. I now thought that I was as powerless to change my life as I was to prevent the abuse. I had been victimized. When I finally got in touch with my pain, I wallowed in it. Who could blame me for not being successful or completely on top of situations, or for coming home from work, plopping down on the sofa, and falling asleep in front of the TV? I'd had a terrible childhood. I thought it was a miracle I could even keep a job. I went from denying my experience to paying attention to it 24 hours a day. I couldn't be a good mother, teacher, or friend. I'd been scarred. Incest was now my identity. I expected very little from myself, and I was all but convinced that my lot in life was to be miserable. By stage 4, I'd gotten in touch with my anger. I attempted to cut my father out of my life completely. I had no contact with him for almost 3 years, even though he was gravely ill during that time and was in and out of the hospital. My father was dying, and I didn't care. In fact, I was hoping he would die. If he did, my problems would be over. My pain would finally end. But all the while I was thinking this, I was adding to my own pain. I felt guilty and ashamed. I didn't see myself as someone who lacked compassion for a sick man, let alone a dying one who was my father. Yet that was precisely how I was acting. As you can imagine, my mother thought my behavior was inexcusable. Finally, I did what I believed to be the only self-respecting thing I could do. I told my mother my secret. The letter hurt her, but she also believed the disclosure it contained. Within days, she flew from Florida, and we met at my sister's house. We talked and cried and hugged and kissed. It was the first real support I'd ever felt from my mother. It was a great relief to have told her about the incest. That was the good part. When she returned to my father's bedside, she told him what my brother and sister and I had said. He called us liars and denied it all. He disowned us. But by now, I was a survivor. And while I was hurt, disappointed, and angry over my father's behavior, I was freed to look elsewhere and to myself to meet my needs. I finally knew my father would never be the answer for me. I took advantage of every resource available to me. I continued to get counseling and worked with an incest survivors group. I wallowed less and did more to get my life in order. I had made it to the survivor stage.
In the survivor stage, the present becomes more powerful than the past, and you're less interested in looking back at how you were hurt and what you did because of it. Pain from the past no longer plays a starring role in your life, but you haven't let go of it. You see the hole in the sidewalk and you walk around it, but you're still not walking on a different street. When you enter the final integration stage, it won't be nearly as dramatic as your entry into the survivor stage. It's fitting that the inner peace you've worked so hard and long to attain arrives peacefully. However, even without the fireworks, you know you've reached the integration stage when you no longer bristle or cringe when someone brings up the topic of abuse or divorce or alcohol or anything that once hurt you. The mention of a name no longer ruins your day. The intense emotions associated with your painful experience seem to have slipped away. Your feelings about the experience remain, but they no longer overwhelm you. It is at this stage that you come to understand how your painful experiences fit into the whole of your life.
At this stage, I chose to reunite with my father. We had things that needed to be said. After a 3-year silence, I picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Dad, this is Suzanne." I asked him to listen, and I told him how I felt. He blurted out the words, "I'm sorry," said he never wanted to hurt me, and hung up. I stuck to my course of healing, and a year later, at Christmas time, I was reunited with my father in a hospital room. I hugged him, and he hugged me. That was all the communication either one of us needed. So when he died, I could stand at his coffin and remember the craftsman, the storyteller, and I put in 6 packets of seeds as a reminder of the great gardener he'd once been.
Suzanne's journey to healing didn't end there. No journey of this kind has a defined end. We constantly grow and change and develop new insights. But she has healed and forgiven, just as you can. As this tape comes to an end, I'm reminded of a poem by an anonymous writer. It says in part, "So you plant your own garden and decorate your own soul instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers. And you learn what you really can endure, that you really are strong, that you really do have worth, and you learn and learn. With every goodbye, you learn.